Hello everyone, it's Tom from 45 Degrees Modelling, and for my channel not to feature a Spitfire is quite frankly heresy. So today I'm building Airfix's 1/48 scale Mk.XII Spitfire. The instructions are really clear, and one feature that I did like about them was that if you didn't want to use the invasion stripe decals, you could paint them and it gave you some measurements. The sprues do lack a little bit of detail and the fit is a bit of an issue, which I'll address later, but overall it's not a bad kit. I began by washing the sprues in warm soapy water and then got to work on the main part of the cockpit. I purchased an Eduard photo etch set, and this included some 3D decals as well as the photo etch seat belts. Sanding away some of the plastic helps the decals sit comfortably on the plastic as well. Other details can also be added. By using this reference image, I was able to see that some of the holes in the framework needed drilling out in the plastic, and this was done on the forward and rear parts of the frame. With the plastic prepared, it was then time to cut out the PE and attach it. When doing so, I like to use Flexi 5K CA glue. And I can't state enough how much PE adds to the authenticity and realism of your model. I wanted this model as well to be displayed with the door open, and the one that came on the sprue had some horrible ejector pin marks, so I carefully sliced out the door on the left hand side of the fuselage. I also took the opportunity before priming as well to tidy up the plastic on the fuselage, and I did this by sticking the two halves together and sanding and scraping away any stubs of plastic. With all the plastic for the cockpit good to go, I used some Mr. Surfacer 1500 black to prime, and with the cockpit colour I used a mixture of XF5 and XF76. Although I didn't have a hard and fast ratio, I just mixed them together until I had a colour that I felt looked appropriate. A good technique to quickly add some realism is dry brushing, and I did this on the sides of the cockpit and the seat. I used some X11 silver just to dry brush where the pilot's knees would be banging, he'd be rubbing, things around the seat as well as the walls. Once this was done, I sealed it all in with X22 clear, ready for some panel line wash. With the clear fully cured, I could then get to work on the 3D decals, and for this I just used some micro set. There was no requirement for some micro sol at this stage, and I've got to say the cockpit was really starting to come alive. The photo etch seat belts as well really added a level of authenticity, and in my opinion it really did enhance that detail. So with the decals in then and the clear on, I could give it a panel line wash using Ammo Mig's Deep Grey, and I think this is better than using a black. It just gives it a grimy, dirty feel, and any excess can be wiped away with a little cotton bud as well. And here is the finished cockpit. I'm pretty happy with it, and the detail has been vastly improved from the original. With the cockpit complete, I could then stick the fuselage halves together. I like to use Tamiya extra thin cement when I'm dealing with plastic, as it melts it together and forms a bond. However, it became apparent that there were some gaps that needed filling. They're simple enough to deal with. All you have to do is take some putty. In this case, I'm using some Vallejo putty, and I just use a moistened cocktail stick and dab it into the gaps. Immediately then I take a cotton bud and just wipe away. If you're not satisfied, you can repeat the process once the putty is dried and sand away any excess if necessary. So with that done then, I then began to get to work on the seam lines, and I used a 400 grit sanding sponge, using it up and down the fuselage and along the front of the wings as well. You obviously have to be careful not to get rid of the detail, so for the panel lines that were remaining, I just used a small razor saw just to bring them back in, and then also a scriber just to tidy it up and level it all off. Using a little bit of masking tape as well, you can use as a guide just to help you, something which I learnt when doing the BF 109. There was also some horrible seam lines on the exhaust as well, so I used a little blade just to scrape them away. The remaining parts of the model went together with no issues, and just to add some visual interest, I decided to build this model with the flaps down. The wheels also needed tidying up as they had a horrible seam line around them, and a little sanding stick just got rid of that line and any plastic stubs that were apparent from coming off the sprue. I used some AK masking putty, Maskol and the mask from the Edward set to hide the cockpit for painting, and for priming I used Mr. Finishing Surface at 1500 grey. My reason to use grey on this aircraft rather than black basing was that I wanted to use a chipping medium this time, and so after the primer had gone down, my full intention was to spray some silver. Again, when I'm spraying my paints down, what I like to do is spray from left to right, up and down, make sure I'm achieving full coverage. And the benefits of giving it a priming grey is that you can see any detail faults, any seam lines that are standing out that can be addressed before beginning painting. And in this case there was a couple of seam lines that needed addressing, so I used some 1200 grit sandpaper just to tidy those up. And once that was tidied up, it was good to go, ready for painting. The underside didn't receive a paint of silver. I went straight in with the XF83 medium sea grey 2, and again, to achieve full coverage, spraying left to right, up and down. As I wanted to do post shading on this model, I then went around the panel lines with XF83 medium sea grey plus some XF68 NATO brown, and this was just to make the panel lines stand out. As I've mentioned before, I wanted the aircraft to be really well weathered, and I wanted a lot of contrast on this model as well. When you are spraying fine lines like this, it helps to increase the thinner ratio as well and turn that pressure down. And once those lines were done, I went over the panel lines on the inside with some XF83 and XF82 sea grey, and I mottled this on very lightly, and it helps tidy up the panel lines as well. So turning the aircraft over then, to prepare for the scratches effect, I first applied a total coverage of Mr. Hobby's Super Metallic 2. It took quite a few coats to get the look that I was happy with. But when it was finally down, it was looking really good as a base for scratches. With the chipping effects then, I sprayed the scratches effects from a distance of about 30 centimetres. A couple of mist coats of that is more than enough, as anything more and it begins to bead on the surface. To use the scratches effect, all you need is a cocktail stick moistened in water, and the water reacts with the chipping fluid and scrapes away the top layer of paint to reveal the silver underneath. During this build as well, one of my Instagram followers pointed out that the propellers were made of wood, so there'd be no scratches effects on the propellers. With the exhaust, I wanted to give them an authentic look rather than just paint them gunmetal, so I initially sprayed some XF64 red brown, and this was followed up by some XF1 black, just to act as like a bit of a soot from the exhaust. I then went over with some light rust wash as well, just to add a lot of depth into the exhaust. And then this was followed up with some gunmetal, just lightly sprayed along the tops. Then I could begin to get to work on the main camouflage pattern, and for the blue I used the XF82 Ocean Grey, the RAF, and I'm not a rivet counter by any stretch of the imagination, so I just followed the instructions loosely. They're just out of sight of the camera, and I just sprayed roughly where that blue sea grey would be. Again, because I was focusing on post shading with this model, I added some XF63 German Grey just to highlight those panel lines. Obviously, because I was using the chipping medium, I couldn't use any pre-shading, so it's a lot easier to focus on post shading. Some XF82 with some XF2 white was then also sprayed in between the panel lines, just to tidy up any overspray and make those panel lines stand out a little bit more. To help with the camouflage then, I used some AK's elastic putty, and as you can see from this image, it has melted as I'd left it on there for too long. So my advice would be to roll it up into little strings, apply it onto your aircraft in the pattern that you'd like, and then fill in the gaps. It is a liquid, so it will melt, but do give it 5-10 minutes just to soak into those panel lines and crevices. So I used some XF81 dark green 2 for the other half of the camouflage, and again the pattern was loosely followed on the instructions, it wasn't 100%. With the panel lines up on the top, I added a dash of XF1 black. It does look quite strong on the video, but I promise you it's not. It was nice and subtle when I was spraying it. To tidy up the panel lines as well, you can spray in between them, and for this I just used XF81 with some XF2 just to tidy up those panel lines and mottle them in and just give the paint some variation in tone. Peeling the masking putty off was really satisfying, but again it's careful just to look all over the aircraft and make sure you get it all off, and this can be used as many times as you want. As soon as you've removed it, get it back in the tin and it's ready for your next model. With the painting complete, I could get to work on the chipping, and as you can see from this image, the Spitfires did receive their fair share of wear and tear. Not just from the pilots getting in and out, but also the ground crew reloading the ammunition, so I was conscious to make the chipping effect on both wings as well. The water from the cocktail stick reacts with the paint underneath and it removes that top layer of paint, and I was conscious to try and keep a nice fine balance of scratching, as I didn't want to go OTT. To prepare the body for decals, I sprayed X22 clear all over the aircraft, and while that was curing I could get to work on weathering the landing gears. I used some 0.4mm black tubing, and this was affixed using some CA glue, and the tubing just represents the brake line. For the main bulk of the weathering I used the oil brusher dust from Ammo by MiG, and I watered it down a little bit with some enamel odourless thinner, and I just caked the whole thing in the dust colour. Excess can be removed using a cotton bud or some more odourless thinner as well. And to add a little extra layer of depth I applied some pigments. I only had Gold on Earth available to me, and I applied this while the oil brusher dust was still wet, so that helped to fix the pigments. Again, any excess can be removed using a cotton brush or an enamel odourless thinner. And another layer of depth was given with the Tamiya panel line accent colour black just around the edges. Using some streaking grime on the inside of the wheel as well, and then brushed to the outside of the wheel, just added that final layer of depth of weathering. I could then move on to applying the decals, and for this I used micro set and micro sol. Patience is required when applying decals, and it's not my favourite aspect of modelling, so I always take my time and I don't film it too much, although I have covered it extensively on this channel before. These were then all sealed in with X22 clear, ready for the further weathering stages. The underside of the wings in the landing gear bays was weathered much to the same extent as the actual landing gears were as well, using the oil brusher dust, the Gold on Earth and the streaking grime. The underside of the aircraft was given a panel line wash of deep grey. This just adds a dirty layer to the aircraft. These Mk.XIIs were flown close to the ground. They were used to combat the low-flying Bf-109s between October 42 and 44, late 44 I believe. So I wanted them to look really dirty. And for the top side I used the brown wash for German dark yellow. Making sure I stroked in the direction of the wind using a flat brush, I gave it a moment to dry and then I went over it with a paper towel, and immediately it just looks like a dirty aeroplane, and it's the look that I was going for. It may not be to everyone's taste, but it's something that I like the look of. To give further credibility of a dirty, well-worn aircraft, I enhanced each panel line with some oil paints. Using a piece of cardboard as a palette to soak up the linseed oil, I carefully applied little dots on every panel line on the underside and the top side and blended them in with a dry brush. It's important to keep cleaning your dry brush, make sure there's no build-up of oil on there. And again, on the inside, just highlighted the inside of the panel lines with some white, and at this stage you can tidy up those panel lines if they're not looking too tidy or to your standards. As you can see from this image, Spitfires get pretty dirty and manky underneath, so I was given a green light to weather as much as I wanted. Conscious that I'd just done all the panel lines with oil paints, I moistened a flat brush with some enamel oilless thinner and just gently brushed over the underside of the aircraft where I wanted the weathering to go, just to break up that surface tension. As you can see, I'm applying the oil dots to the trailing edges of the panel lines. This would just be where the oil and the dirt and grime would seep out from underneath from the engine. Then using a flat brush, I brushed in the motion and the direction of the airflow, and you can build this up as slowly or as much as you want. and any errors can be removed with some enamel odourless thinner, but just be conscious if you do that, you probably be removing the panel line oil paints as well. I wanted to have a little play on this aircraft with the weathering, so I took an oil brusher, Starship based sludge, and again using the same method just to add variety and tone to that dirt underneath, I gently touched it up in select places as well. I wanted to give further authenticity to the weathering, so using very light layers I used ammo shaders, dirt and grime to build up the weathering again on the underside of the aircraft. This is a water-based acrylic, and so if you're not happy you can brush this away with water to clean it up. They're really good, the shaders. I've used them quite a lot now and they're really effective, and it's definitely a product I would recommend. As the underside of the aircraft wouldn't really be seen and it'd just be sat on my shelf, I felt this gave me a little bit of artistic license just to practice with the products and just try different techniques as well, trying to build up different layers of dirt and grime where I felt that they would do on the actual aircraft. And with that step finished, I called this model complete. Guys, thanks for watching. I'm really happy with the final outcome of this highly weathered Spitfire. It's a low-flying aircraft, so I wanted it nice and dirty. So yeah, the photo etch from Edouard definitely enhanced that detail that was certainly lacking from out of the box. So if you enjoyed this video and I added value, please hit that like button. Please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the model. And please, if you've not done so already, consider subscribing as it helps my channel grow. And I'll see you in the next build.